Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and today we are taking a look at the Virtual Boy. Now, this Virtual Boy was sent in for work by my friend Try of My Life in Gaming, and he sent it in because both of his lenses are starting to go out. Now, it's a very common fault with these systems, so in addition to addressing that issue, we have decided to also give this system a full recap and a nice little VGA mod. By the time that we're done with this system, we should have in our hands the ultimate Virtual Boy. So let's not waste any time and get to it. So the first order of business is to remove all the screws. Now, if you plan on working on either a Virtual Boy or a GameCube, those iFixit toolkits are not going to cut it. The channels for these screws are just way too deep, so neither the game bits from those toolkits or even the smaller drill bits will work here. Even if you rounded out the sides of the drill bit to get a little more length out of it, the holes are just too deep and too narrow to allow any adaptive screwdriver or drill to lock on. You will need either a dedicated 4.5mm game bit screwdriver or one of these longer 4.5mm game bit drill bits from Console 5. Just a little tip for those who are looking to work on one of these themselves. Alright, so that was a little bit of a challenge. The connectors here just weren't giving in terms of like removing the cabling here. So unfortunately I did have to go off camera with it just because I wanted to be careful as to not break anything while taking this system fully apart. But as you can see, we got the unit completely broken down. So let's start things off with a simple recap of the entire system. Now we have a few different boards to look at, so let's start with the main board and work our way around. So let's get to it. Now that we have the whole system recapped, we'll be moving on to the major repair that this system needs, and that would be the lenses here. So all we need to do to free the lenses from the assembly is to remove the screws that bind them. Alright, so with the lenses removed, we can begin to work on them. So the most common fault with all Virtual Boys is either going to be no picture or glitchy picture, and this is caused by the ribbon cable that connects the lenses to the main board. Now these aren't soldered on, but rather it uses a type of adhesive that friction fits the ribbon to the metal contacts. Now this is a common practice with LCD technology at the time, but as we have seen with the original Game Boy or Game Gear for example, over time that adhesive tends to weaken and loses its bond. Not helped with the Virtual Boy in particular because it's constantly sliding side to side whenever you make adjustments. Now, the original way of addressing this issue was by directly soldering the flex to the PCB, which can work, but it is a rather tricky process and you essentially need to melt the ribbon to expose the contacts. But even if we were successful with doing it that way, the quality of these ribbons are just so bad, they could either be eroded somewhere inside the flex itself or just break off again anyways. So what we're going to do instead is replace it with this. Now this is the Virtual Ribbon by Sega Sonic Fan, and what this essentially does is replace the old ribbon with a PCB and generic flat flex cable. This will ensure a much longer lasting connection and an easier repair should anything happen to either the PCB or the flat flex cable. Now, you may have noticed that this kit itself does require some assembly, which personally I think this should come pre-assembled, but that's not my call to make. It just means we have some prep work to do prior to installation. So let's not waste any time and get to it. Alright, so now that we got the virtual ribbons assembled, we can now proceed to installing them onto the lenses. Now, one thing I want to note about assembly is when installing the diagnostic LED to the virtual ribbon, you want to make sure that you line up the green striped side, which you can tell which side is which by flipping the LED over and taking a look at its backside. But you want to make sure that the green striped side of the LED matches up with the little white stripe here of the PCB. Just something I wanted to note considering the fact that the assembly footage did not have any audio. But that out of the way, with the virtual ribbons put together, we can now install them onto the lenses. So in order to make this easier for us, we got ourselves this little piece here. This is the easy mount, and its sole purpose is to line up and lock in the lenses and the virtual ribbon PCBs for easier installation. But before we do that, we need to remove the old ribbon. And since it's adhered to the board and locked in with a strip of epoxy, all we need to do is cut the epoxy and slowly peel the ribbons off. So let's not waste any time and get to it. Now that we got the ribbons removed, we now need to tin the pads of our lenses. That way it can make a solid contact with the virtual ribbon PCBs. Now, once we have these pads tinned, we need to make sure these pads are as flat as possible as to not have an overly large gap between the virtual ribbon PCB and the lenses. So let's not waste any time and get to it. With the pads tinned, all we need to do now is to lock everything into place. So to lock it all down to the easy mount, we will need to use the screws that lock the lenses to the original frame. Now, this hole is threaded, so be sure to sit the screws down first by turning it counterclockwise until you feel it click into place. Once you screw it all in hand tight, you just want to loosen the screw by a single turn. The reason for this is because if it is screwed in too tightly, you won't be able to flow solder underneath the virtual ribbon PCB, which is how it will make contact with the lenses. So let's not waste any time and get to it. So with the lenses merged with the virtual ribbon PCBs, we need to check continuity and make sure everything is solid. If everything is golden, we can move on to the next step, and that will be reassembly and testing. Actually, before I reassemble for testing, I'm just going to go ahead and lube up all the mechanical parts here, so that way it's not feeling so stiff. So, got me some white lithium grease. So we're just gonna go ahead and put a generous dab on here. Okay, now we're going to do an initial test of the Virtual Boy just to make sure everything is good. So I have my controller hooked up, I have a copy of Wario Land plugged in, and we're just going to fire it up and see if it works. Now I'm going to try to get as close to the camera as possible, just so that way we can see the screen. So let's flick on the power. As you can see, we have visual from one lens and visual from the other. Although it's a little blurry because, well, can't really see the lenses very well, but as you can see, we are getting picture. So that's good. But do we have gameplay? Sounds like it. Alright, enough of that. So we've confirmed that the Virtual Boy does work, but obviously trying to film from the lenses is not really an ideal way of like playing the Virtual Boy. I mean, it's supposed to be in your face for a reason, but that's why we got the next mod to work on. So now that we have confirmed the Virtual Ribbon works, we can now move forward with the final piece for this system, and that is the Virtual Tap. The Virtual Tap is a comprehensive mod by Furtek that allows users to intercept one of the two lenses and output to both the intercepted lens and to a video output of choice. Now there are two versions of this kit, an RGBS kit and a VGA kit. The RGBS version outputs at 15 kHz 240p with a slightly squished resolution to fit within a 4:3 frame. The VGA version outputs at 31 kHz 480p at native resolution. The version of the kit that we have here is the VGA version. Now, strangely, despite the fact that the Virtual Boy is a native 50Hz system, these kits frame buffer it to 60Hz with two different options for frame buffering. The default frame buffering, which is called quad buffering, adds between 20 milliseconds and 37 milliseconds of lag without screen tearing. The second option is fast buffer, which only adds 20 milliseconds of lag at max. However, it does introduce screen tearing. Given the fact that we can't just turn off frame buffering and just output at the native refresh rate, we are going to just stick with the default frame buffering. Now, for the most part, installing this kit is trivial. The true challenge we will be facing is installing our video interface port, which the kit does not come with, by the way. I've had to make a separate order for the VGA port that we will be using. Once more, there is no cutting template for the VGA install, so we are going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. So, let me show you how we will do it. So the first step to this will be placing some masking tape down, and tracing out our VGA port on it. Afterwards, we will transfer it to the Virtual Boy's bottom shell for drilling and cutting out the main port. Now that we got the main port cut out, we now need to mark and drill out 2 holes for the hex standoffs, which serves the purpose of both locking the VGA port to place via friction fitting, as well as give us the 2 posts needed for locking in our VGA cables. We will also be drilling in another hole for the palette switch, which allows us to change the color of the video output to the user's desire. So, let's get to it. Alright, now that we have our holes drilled, cut out, and our ports installed, we will be wiring up our kit, because once we mount it to the Virtual Boy, there's no easy way to access these pads. Now, you may have also noticed that there are 2 wires installed already. This is for the palette switch, and the reason it's pre-wired is because there's only one ground pad, so both the VGA output and the switch will have to share. So, let's not waste any time, and get to wiring. So with all the wires attached to the virtual tap, we can move forward with installing it into the system, which installing it is actually pretty straightforward. All we do is take one end of the virtual ribbon's FFC and lock it in like so. And then we take the other half of the FFC from our virtual tap and attach it to the main board like so. So now all we gotta do is peel off the double-sided sticky pad here, put it onto the frame here, and then move forward with wiring it in. So let's get to it. Alright, sorry for the sudden drop in audio quality. Unfortunately, the VGA port on my test monitor doesn't work, so we're forced to having to test this Virtual Boy on my VGA CRT. So let's get this thing hooked up. Now you may have also noticed the port has a little bit more plastic cut out of it than as I showed before. And the reason why is I had to cut out more material in order for the cables to actually fit correctly. If it was as flush to the port as possible, the cables just would not fit. So yeah, it's a bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. So let's get this thing hooked up. And I have my copy of Wario Land plugged in. So it's kind of tough to do this one-handed. There we go. Whoop. And as you can see, we're able to lock in our VGA cable. Nice and tight. So let's grab our controller, flick on the power. Now let's see if we still have a picture from the lenses. And it looks like we do. But how about? Yep, looks like we got a picture on the big screen. Or 13-inch screen in this case. So automatic pause, let's set that to off. Now I don't have audio hooked up to my speakers. We're just hearing it straight from the Virtual Boy. But as you can hear, it sounds just fine. And it looks great. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit the palette switch button, just to make sure that works. And it looks like it does. We got yellow, green, blue, or cyan. This is blue. Purple, white, inverted, and back to red. So yeah, looks like our Virtual Boy mod works. So we're just gonna hit the power. So now that we've confirmed that the Virtual Boy works, we're just gonna go ahead and move back to the desk for some final thoughts. And with that, the Virtual Boy is now complete. We got the system fully recapped, the virtual ribbon installed, and the virtual tap also installed. So now, Tri can enjoy the Virtual Boy on the go and from the comfort of his own setup. It was certainly a challenging process, but I had a lot of fun with it, and hopefully Tri enjoys the system just as much as I did putting it together. Now, if you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.